Hello, everybody. My name is John Cranham. I am clinical director of the Dawson Academy. It's a pleasure to be with you, and today we're going to be talking about a topic that is hot right now in dentistry from the standpoint that anterior guidance, while it's been around for a very long time, there seems to be some disagreement about whether this is something that's important or if in fact it's a myth. And one of the reasons that I want to do this webinar is that I think there's people that are trying to talk about what the Dawson Academy believes about anterior guidance. And we've actually been very clear on this topic since as long as Dr. Dawson's been teaching from the early 1970s. And so I want to clarify what it is we believe and how we view this as part of a really good occlusion where we can control force and decrease muscle activity and help our restorations last a really long time, whether those be on anterior teeth or on posterior teeth. So let's begin with a few definitions, and let's just talk about what anterior guidance is. Lots of definitions out here, but one of the simplest ones is it is the influence of contacting surfaces of the anterior teeth during mandibular excursive movements to limit posterior tooth contacts. So as we visualize the lower incisors traveling on the linguals of the upper incisors from perhaps the centric stop to incisal edges, and if we look at the canines contacting from centric stop out to the cusp tip of the canine, you can imagine that if you had articulating paper there, you would be picking up lines. And if those surfaces, if they were steep enough to disclude the back teeth, that would in fact be anterior guidance. I want you to think about anterior guidance as a movement that is inside out. So from centric stop up, and this is typically a movement a patient makes when we ask them to make it, or if they are bruxing or grinding. So let's first talk about why anterior guidance is important, and then we can move to envelope of function. So anterior guidance is important because it is the key to protecting the back teeth and creating a peaceful neuromuscular system. One of the concepts that we will give you is that the enemy of a good occlusion is when back teeth rub. So if we look at that left picture and imagine if a jaw is sliding side to side and the patient can't get to their back teeth, that patient is generally healthier than the one on the right who can in fact rub on their back teeth. And one of the reasons for that is when they're rubbing on their back teeth, they have the capacity to basically pull more muscle fibers into play. The mechanoreceptors around the teeth get activated. These mechanoreceptors are what call muscle fibers into play when we're chewing. And as you'll also see, we're often further back in the mouth, which has more force on it. So the key point is when back teeth rub, muscle activity increases. So anterior guidance is about protecting the back teeth and decreasing muscle activity. When back teeth rub, some of the signs of instability that we see are mobility on teeth, certainly wear on teeth, and make no mistake, a lot of the fractures that we see are related to this. As we go back in the mouth, there's more force. Monsieur and Regnick studied this, that on second molars, we have 9 times more force than we do on canine teeth. And so if somebody can slide side to side and rub on a back tooth, it will be damaging. But there's been a lot of research on neuromuscular activity and the fact that an interference to a back teeth actually calls muscle fibers into play. And this was the classic electromyographic research by Williamson and Lundquist, where they checked out ideal occlusions and splints. And if somebody in fact had an interference-free occlusion where they could squeeze and slide side to side, this is a patient where they're measuring the muscle activity of the temporalis and master muscles, and where you see that line down the center of the page is where the jaw starts to slide into an excursive movement. he was able to show that master and temporalis muscles basically shut off the second back teeth disclude. We've measured many of our own patients. Looking at the left side there, this is a patient that has working side interferences, and you'll notice that he's clenching from about 2 seconds to 4 seconds on that EMG, and as he slides to the right, there's a sustained hypercontraction of the right temporalis and the right master. That's the sustained muscle activity you're seeing is back teeth bump. The right two pictures are with a patient about 4 hours later in provisionals, and there again, he now has no ability to rub. He clenches from 2 seconds to 4 seconds, and as he slides, those muscles shut off. So muscle activity is a big thing, and what we know is that when we're building somebody, the protection of the front teeth, by the front teeth to the back teeth, allows lateral forces to be on teeth that are more appropriate. It's further away from the fulcrum. Canines have the longest root in the mouth, the buttressing bone of the cuspid eminence, and as we get further back, we're closer to the fulcrum mechanically, which creates more force, and we also know that we have increased muscle activity. So we do believe that if we're going to have a stable minimal stress occlusion, anterior guidance is an incredibly important part of it. But what about envelope of function? Let's start with the definition. Envelope of function is the path the mandible, specifically the lower incisors, will travel or follow during speech or chewing. So if we think about when we start talking or chewing, there's an outside-in movement of the lower incisors, and what we want is for the lower incisors to get all the way back to the centric stop without running into the front teeth. So that means there has to be enough concavity, and if we get that contour too steep or those cingulum areas too thick, it will interfere. We want you to think about envelope of function as an outside-in movement. So inside out from centric stop to incisal edge is anterior guidance. Outside in from incisal edge to centric stop is envelope of function. So which is more important? My frustration is that there's people telling the dental world that the Dawson Academy only cares about envelope of function. Anterior guidance, that we're going to make teeth as steep as they need to be to disclude the back teeth, and that's all that we look at. Yet there's others talking about the fact, so much focus on envelope of function, even describing anterior guidance as a myth, that it's not important. And we actually believe at the Dawson Academy that they're both equally important, that it is absolutely possible to balance our concern for both of these critical aspects of occlusal design. We have to have anterior guidance to protect the teeth and to decrease muscle activity, but if we make our anterior guidances too steep and interfere with the envelope of function, we're going to have just as much trouble. Teeth that are not stable, that are loose up front, that porcelain chips, these type of things. So with this understanding, let's just review the three basic requirements for successful occlusal therapy. And the first is we're going to talk about stable TMJs that are in harmony with stable occlusal contacts. And what we mean by that is that in order for an occlusion to be stable, one of the biggest, most important things is that we've got a stable joint that's comfortable when firmly loaded, and that we make sure that that stable, orthopedically stable condylar position is verified with load testing. We don't simply want to trust where the jaw is floating in space after tensing or deprogramming for a certain period of time. All those things are good to relax muscles, but we want to make sure that we are in a stable seated position. That becomes important. So always load testing to be sure that the lateral pterygoid is completely released, that we have a properly aligned condyle disc assembly is important. So the principle is if the TMJ is not stable, the inclusion will not be stable. And while we're not talking about the joint, we do have to just mention that Dawson's bilateral manipulation is the way that we verify. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't use Lucia jigs and some of these other things to help the patient relax and get everything calmed down. but we are going to be verifying centric relation with this technique. And by centric relation, we're saying that it is the relationship of the mandible to the maxilla when the properly aligned condyle disc assemblies are in the most superior position against the eminentiae, irrespective of tooth position or vertical dimension. So if you visualize that condyle just sliding up that articular eminence till it can't get any higher, and then we have a properly interposed disc, and we can load that patient without any tension or tenderness, that's CR. And so again, we want to have the capacity when we're looking at our patients to make sure that we are have the ability to identify things going on in the joint. We certainly want to avoid any active joint disease, whether it's disc displacement or some sort of degeneration, because that's a patient we'd want to get the joint stable first before we even started to try to fix their occlusion permanently. So along with stable joints, we need to have stable occlusal contacts. And that means when the jaw closes, we want to have equal intensity contacts all the way around. And we believe in a cusp fossa occlusion in the back with also stable stops on the anterior teeth, which we'll speak to in a second. Now on back teeth, we are prone to look at cusp fossa occlusion, where the upper lingual cusp and the lower buccal cusp land on a flat surface. That will prevent a tooth from shifting positions. Teeth that land on an incline will not be stable over time. So those functional cusps, the upper lingual cusp and the lower buccal cusp, are important, and making sure that they are landing on that flat surface. While the tripod contact is still out there, and it is definitely being taught in most dental schools, this is something that is harder to do because you have 3 points of contact around each tooth. And if you lose one of those contacts, then you tend to put a lateral load on a tooth. So we are big believers in the cusp fossa. By doing an occlusion like this, whatever load the patient can generate, we're spreading it throughout the arch form. And notice we also like stable stops on incisors, because if you're pulling shim stock out on your lower incisors, that will not be stable over time because the teeth will simply erupt into contact. And I want you to think about that, because when we think about the path of the lower incisor, any vertical movement of a lower incisor changes the elliptical outside path of the envelope of function. So that's important. Stable stops all the way around, and in harmony with good stable joints is our first requirement. Second requirement is really what the whole webinar is about, and we'll reiterate some of the things we've already discussed, but I want you to pay close attention to, this has been the rule, close attention to the rule, because this has been the rule for as long as Dr. Dawson's been teaching, since the early 70s. And our rule is that we have an anterior guidance in harmony with the envelope of function. That means, yes, when we go into a forward movement inside out, there is absolute protection of the posterior teeth, both for the neuromuscular benefits we've discussed, as well as the mechanical benefits. But we also have enough concavity on those lingual contours so when the patient is traveling outside in when they're chewing and speaking, that it does not interfere. So this guidance has to be steep enough to exclude the back teeth, concave enough to be in harmony with the envelope of function. And so as we look carefully at those lines, we have to have a way to work that out. Now, what's interesting about envelope of function is some people are more horizontal, as you would see by that elliptical path on the left, and some people are straight up and down, completely vertical. The way you know whether the envelope of function is optimum for the patient, if it's a new patient and you've never seen them, if their teeth are really, really vertical like you'd see on that far right, if there's no signs of instability, if there's no wear, there's no mobility, there's no migration, the patient's chewing properly, then their interincisal angle fits their envelope of function. So as we look at this in a little bit more detail, and you look at the incisors there in the front, you look at that interincisal angle, If this person's lucky enough to have normal tooth size and normal arch form, that incisal angle is probably enough so that if it is steep enough to exclude the back teeth, it's probably also going to be in harmony with the outside in movement of the jaw. That's why orthodontics often chooses this particular interincisal angle. Additionally, you may have people that are deeper that you're wondering about, but what I would say is that if there's not signs of instability, you probably have a very vertical chewing pattern. And what we have to be careful about, if we start changing a person like this, we might actually put them into a less than stable relationship, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. When you have a restricted envelope of function, what that means is that the contours, the lingual contours of the upper incisors are in the way of how the lower jaw moves. And so if you look at this from our Bite FX people, this is the kind of wear pattern that you will see. And so imagine then if you're looking at this, and let's say when you look at the pictures on the right there, that this is a patient who had sort of a normal interincisal angle, a normal eruption process, but maybe this patient had a lot of crowding. And in order to fix the crowding, the orthodontist took some premolars out and they basically retracted the anterior teeth and created the interincisal angle you're seeing on the left there. Well, I think you can now see that when you change the interincisal angle, it really doesn't change the envelope of function. And this is the wear pattern that we have to be careful of, because if we move or restore a tooth in the way of that, this is the kind of damage that you're going to see. And you'll see abfraction type looking lesions from the bending that's occurring. And of course, the wear and tear that we see is from incisal edge down towards that centric stop. It's usually going to be on the incisal third of the lingual contour of the teeth. You're also going to see wear and tear on the lower incisors and on the canines. But this is somebody clearly too steep. And of course, when we look at the patient, notice that they are missing first bicuspids. Make no mistake, this is not picking on the orthodontist here. Restorative dentists can do this just as easily. So if we're going to fix somebody like this orthodontically, if we identify it early, what we can do is do some intrusion of the lower teeth. Looking at the picture on the left there, you're looking at the left side, we can intrude the lower teeth and then use something called root torque, where we're not going to change the position of the upper incisal edge, but we're going to bring the root back lingually. And what that does is, in effect, changes the interincisal angle and creates a more shallow guidance pattern that's likely to fit. What you don't want to do is you don't want to just tip the tooth out like you're seeing on the right there. When you just tip the tooth out, we now lack a stop. And if we lack a stop, there's nothing to prevent that lower incisor from erupting, and you will not have anterior guidance because the jaw will slide for a bit before the teeth engage. So the left one's correct, the right one's incorrect. And so make sure that you're fulfilling the requirements of occlusal stability when you're also fixing a problem with envelope of function. If you're going to do a case like this restoratively, again, watching the teeth in the center there, we could certainly intrude these teeth and then restore the uppers by reducing more on the lingual, bringing the edge forward slightly, and then bringing in our cingulum. This would be able to be worked out in an articulator for anterior guidance, but as you'll see in a second, envelope of function to dial in that lingual contour would have to be worked out in the mouth. So our principle is the key to creating an anterior guidance that is in harmony with the envelope of function is to understand long-centric. And let's talk about long-centric, because there's lots of definitions to this. But long-centric is not the slide between CR and MI. That is not long-centric. Long-centric is the slight forward posturing of a mandible that occurs during chewing and speech from centric relation. So in order to check for centric relation, you already have to be there. The patient has to be either equilibrated or restored to CR. And then what we're going to do is let the patient sit up, and we'll see from centric relation what sort of horizontal displacement there is in that outside-in stroke. And again, this is completely variable. So to check this, what we do is we have the patient sit up, and we're gonna basically just have the patient bite on first some red paper. Chop, chop, chop with the red paper. That's sort of outside in. Then we're going to lay the patient back and verify that we're in centric and close them into CR. So the key to creating an anterior guidance is to be in harmony with the envelope of function, and this starts with long centric. So just to be clear, we lay the patient back. That left picture, we're going to make blue marks in centric, and we sit the patient up. I even like to have them lean forward a little bit, and we'll just have them bite. And visualize it if the mandible postures forward and the lingual contours of the anterior teeth are in the way, we'll see an interference much like that. And if they do bump, if you do see tooth structure catching anterior to the centric stop on that incline, it needs to be removed. And that picture on the right there is indicating that you would increase the concavity of those incisors until the patient could close back without interfering. Looking at this clinically, this is what we often see. The blue marks are centric relation. Those red smudges are what we picked up when we were checking for long centric. And so we want to visualize is that as that patient closed outside in, they simply caught that. And what we would do is adjust the red marks and not touch the blue marks. So we are basically increasing the concavity. So envelope of function then is determined by our centric relation position, which we check with bilateral manipulation, our correct incisal edge position that we would work out aesthetically and phonetically, the need for long centric, which is that postural shift that occurs as the patient sits up, and the mandible may need to posture forward slightly. Smooth protrusive path and the smooth lateral anterior guidance. So once we check for long centric and we know we are concave enough, now we can go from centric stop to incisal edge and develop our balanced lines. And if you want to have lines and protrusion on the centrals and laterals, and good canine rise, you can do that. If you want to create an anterior group function, you can do that. But by working out long centric first, we are now creating an anterior guidance that is in harmony with the envelope of function. So the principle is we always adjust for long centric to make sure that we are in harmony with the envelope of function. And as I want to be clear, this is not something new. This is something that we've been talking about, or Dr. Dawson has been talking about since the early 70s. So key point here, as we look at the formula for good occlusion, visualize that in centric relation, the jaw closes, we have equal intensity contacts all the way around. As we leave centric relation and go into protrusion and left or right lateral movement, the forces are going to be guided off the front teeth, that's anterior guidance. And we're going to make sure those lingual contours are concave enough to be in harmony with the envelope of function. The key point, a correct anterior guidance will protect the back teeth as well as be in harmony with the envelope of function. The third requirement then is that we want to have non-interfering posterior teeth, which I think makes total sense because we've been talking about anterior guidance. But we have one more little thing to just remind you on. We're going to have non-interfering posterior teeth that don't interfere with the TMJs in the back and don't interfere with the anterior guidance in the front. So from centric relation then, as we go from centric relation into a protrusive stroke and from centric relation into a lateral anterior guidance, we see that the posterior morphology is shallower than the anterior guidance in the front. Now the other thing to remember is that in order to have this interference-free occlusion or non-interfering posterior teeth, the only interference-free occlusion is the one that starts in centric relation. And this is why we want to be sure the condyle is seated. If we're doing something like tensing, or if you're trusting a deprogrammer for a few weeks and you're not load testing, this mandible might be sitting on the eminence, and that's what we see sometimes. If the mandible is postured forward, you may clear for envelope of function, but if this condyle has the ability to go back, these back teeth will rub. And if the back teeth will rub, this creates the same interference as if you didn't have good anterior guidance. So this is why we make such a big deal about the joint and about joint stability. Because if the TMJ is not seated and stable, the occlusion will not be seated and stable. So whatever we need to do to first deprogram the patient, we're always going to load test with with bilateral manipulation. And this is a good example of us finding that first point of contact at centric. And then if we look at this patient sliding between centric relation here and maximum cuspation there, that patient, when they clench, can just as easily rub on that second molar. All right, so as we look at this, we want to see that a slide between CR and MI is damaging. This is where, if they're clenching and doing this, this is why the #1 tooth loss from periodontal disease is second molars. It's why we see the wear back there. It's why teeth break there, back there. So the key point, if you do not begin in a seated stable condylar position, centric relation, interferences between CR and maximum cuspation will remain on the back teeth. And then looking at this from another way, it will therefore be impossible to have a correct anterior guidance unless we begin with equal intensity contacts in CR. So looking at another video, this is a patient from centric relation where the condyle can't get any higher, and this is what we want to see, the ability to create that interference-free occlusion. Our goal is that the second the patient leaves CR, if they move in any direction, we'll start with those equal intensity contacts all the way around at centric, but if they move in any direction, we have immediate disclusion of the posterior teeth. So the formula for a perfected occlusion then is going to be lines in front, dots in back. Lines steep enough to exclude the back teeth, but still concave enough to be in harmony with the envelope of function. So which is more important then? Is it more important to have anterior guidance, or is it more important to have envelope of function? And again, as we look at this, this is the great argument today. A lot of people are saying that all we care about is anterior guidance, but we want to be sure that you know that that is not the truth. The other way to say it, is it an inside-out thing, where we're just caring about the contours from centric stop out to the incisal edge as you look at the anterior guidance, or should we just be focusing on what's happening outside in? This is the great debate. So let's be real clear about this. Job one of the anterior guidance is to prevent the back teeth from rubbing. We do not want the back teeth to rub. We have enough research and documentation on this. We've already talked about Williamson and Lundquist's work back in the 80s. Back teeth rub, these are the things that cause the breakdown that we see. And this has been researched over and over and over again. Probably my favorite research in the last decade has been the T-scan EMG research by Kirstein, where we can see actual tooth contact and what muscles are firing in real time. And so, again, in order for this to occur, the anterior guidance must be steeper for the steeper than the posterior morphology. Job two of the anterior guidance is that it must be in harmony with the envelope of function. And again, a lot has been written about this. If we do get the guidance too steep, we're going to certainly have trouble. So that lingual contour from incisal edge back to the centric stop has to be concave enough so that the lower incisors don't touch. So again, the question, Is it inside out or is it outside in? We can go all the way back to 1974 when Dr. Dawson was writing down his goals of occlusion, and we have been clear since that time that it has to be both. And this is one of Dr. Dawson's biggest gifts to dentistry, the concept of a customized anterior guidance. A guidance that is steep enough to exclude the back teeth, but still concave enough to be in harmony with the envelope of function. Again, so quickly, steep enough to exclude the back teeth, but concave enough to be in harmony with the envelope of function. So that is why the rule in the Dawson philosophy is what it is. And again, this is what we have been teaching for as long as Dr. Dawson has been doing this. So with that, let's just look at a few cases and think about what goes into this and some of the nuances about when we can look at anterior guidance, but when we actually have to figure out envelope of function. We treatment plan for aesthetic and functional goals. We're going to treatment plan for biologic health, and we're going to treatment plans for structural integrity. The top two certainly have to be worked out with photographs and with an articulator. But these are things that we definitely aren't going to be just doing by the seat of our pants looking in the mouth, whereas a lot of the biological and structural things we determine tooth by tooth. With Dawson, we use our diagnostic wizard, where we can go ahead and import the photographs and make determinations about tooth position from incisal ledge to free gingival margin. And we can do that for both the top and the bottom teeth. And we can get very, very specific about the exact contours that we want, and then have the capacity to relate this back to the articulator. So this is what we would call aesthetic design, the ability to really get specific about the size and shape of the teeth. As we look at occlusal design, the occlusal design is going to have to be worked out into the articulator, but it's going to be the time that we fulfill those requirements of occlusal stability. And so having the ability to mount cast and centric relation and understand our treatment options, we can then determine whether this is something that we can reshape, whether we need to move teeth, whether we need to restore teeth, or whether we need to move the bone, consider some sort of orthognathic situation. And again, while we do these things on an articulator, it's very important for us to remember that while we can check for anterior guidance and posterior exclusion on an articulator and make sure that the lines and the dots are in the right place, what you can't determine on an articulator is the outside-in movement of the jaw. So the key point is when designing a stable occlusion on an articulator, you can only work out anterior guidance and posterior exclusion. Envelope of function must be determined in the mouth. Maybe in the future with jaw tracking and some of the things that we have now in the future, maybe that's something that we'll be able to do. Somehow relate that to a virtual instrument. So let's look at some of the patients that we may run into, and just remind you, for those that you've been trained with us, those of you that you haven't, this is essentially our protocol for handling patients. And notice that it's predicated upon what we find during a TMJ occlusal exam. If you do a TMJ occlusal exam and it's completely negative, the joints are healthy and there's no occlusal disease, and everything's working for the patient and they're happy with how their teeth look, that's a type 1 patient that we probably don't need to change the occlusion. We can work in their own habitual occlusion. The type 2 patient is the one that has a good stable joint, verifiable centric, but signs of instability related to the teeth, the muscles, but the joints are good. This is the patient that we're going to fulfill our occlusal design utilizing those requirements we just discussed. And that third patient is basically the TMJ patient, where this primary side of instability is where the joint is breaking down. And we're going to talk mainly about the second one today. Understand that that third one is always going to involve a first phase that stabilizes the joint and a second phase that addresses the occlusion. So let's look at these type 2 patients in a little bit more detail. When we're treating occlusion and fulfilling these requirements of occlusal stability, our goal is going to be to pick the most conservative treatment option or options to fix the problem and establish occlusal stability. And with that, we can create those goals by reshaping teeth, repositioning teeth, restoring teeth, or repositioning a bony segment. And looking at the first one, there are a lot of patients, this is an example of a headache patient, that has a slight discrepancy between CR and MI, that when we analyze their occlusion, we can find that it's very possible to simply reshape the teeth. And when we reshape the teeth, we're going to recontour the teeth to centric, create an anterior guidance and posterior exclusion, and then verify the way I showed you checking for long centric that we're still in harmony with the envelope of function. Similarly, a lot of our patients with occlusal issues have tooth position problems. And again, working with a competent orthodontist or doing it yourself, when you understand centric relation and the requirements of the good occlusal stability, we have the ability to have great success in fulfilling the requirements. Here again, while we can easily create anterior guidance, we don't always know envelope of function, and that is something that we have to check in the mouth utilizing long centric. Third possibility is restorative. We can certainly wax the teeth to the desired length for aesthetics, make good guesstimates about anterior guidance on our articulator, but when it comes to really working this out in the mouth, we have to test drive things in the provisionals, so that we're not only going to get something that looks nice, but we're also going to have something that functions properly. And again, working this out first on the articulator to make sure the anterior guidance is there, but then harmonizing it in the mouth, checking the envelope of function through the utilization of long centric. Some of the more difficult cases are the TMJ patients that are stabilized with a splint. This is somebody that ends up with a large discrepancy that can only be resolved with orthodontic surgery. And here again, this is a combination of orthodontic surgery and some bonding. But again, we're in centric relation, ending with good stable stops, a guidance that's steep enough to exclude the back teeth, and still in harmony with the envelope of function. So what I've tried to do here is to really talk a little bit about this whole issue of anterior guidance. I want you to see how it fits within the confines of these three types of patients. But more importantly, I want to dispel the myth that at the Dawson Academy we don't care about envelope of function. Dr. Dawson's been clear about this for a very long time, that to have good control of the occlusion, you absolutely have to begin in centric relation with good stable joint. We have to be able to know how to get good centric stops. We have to have a steep enough anterior guidance to exclude the back teeth, but we definitely have to be in harmony with the envelope of function. The thing that I don't understand is, why are we arguing about this? Why does this have to be either or? It needs to be both. If it's both, we're going to have the benefits of having good control of the occlusion, as well as having the one that's going to last the longest and be most comfortable. So I hope that that's been educational for you. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope that I can address you sometime in the future on another topic. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, I'm John Cranham with the Dawson Academy. Hope you enjoyed it. Take care.